Hi, so this is my debate response to Alexander Dower saying he's giving me a few points on why economic liberalism could not lead to world peace. So I'll just be countering a few of those, four to be specifically. I'll just go right ahead. So just the general points that he made. The first was that why economic liberalism couldn't lead to world peace would be that states are selfish and they always want more power, more freedom, and tend to be more greedy. And this would then lead to a second point, which I think go hand in hand, so I'll just combine them into one single point. And that economic interdependence will lead to competitions and embargoes, tariffs, and such, just because, at least what he says, that states want as much power as they can, and just like human nature, it is flawed, in his words, and that eventually we'll want more than what we can have, and it will just destroy everything pretty much, or more so. So my counter to this is that this is not always the case. Yes, of course, states do want more power, more freedom. Of course, that's always something good, but that would never over trump free trade, open trade, and free market. That always would over trump or overpower power itself. Because of course, power and freedom is nice, but what's the point of having all that power, freedom, and let's just say all the economic power, if eventually you'll lose it, because once you impose tariffs, embargoes, or draw out competition, this will just lead to starving out your own country or your own state. And as we know, pretty simple economics: a state cannot survive self-sufficiently. It just won't work, and it will just strangle itself pretty much. Although I do believe that he makes a pretty good point, especially when it comes to, let's, for lack of a better word, a third world, a less developed state. They do tend to do this quite often, in where they would either abuse neighboring states, abuse their nation, or just get too greedy and eventually just destroy themselves. I know that does happen in quite a few places, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen at all. I'm just saying overall in general. The bigger powers of the world definitely will not go that route. And as long as the bigger powers, let's, for just to generalize, the United States, most of Europe, Southeast Asia, and China, of course, if they don't fall and they don't go down that path, then there is still hope for world peace, as they still stabilize the economy just enough for the other states to follow as well. His third, or I guess second, point was that states sometimes don't act rationally, and the economic inequality between states will always lead to tension and eventually conflict. And I do agree that this is true, that there is economic inequality. You cannot, not everyone can be a winner, as my economic teacher said. There must be winners and there must be non-winners. But this isn't technically all there is to it. It's just barely scratching the surface, really. That's saying that economic inequality will create tension, and this is a bad thing. Actually, I believe, and a lot of people do believe, that this is the opposite. That tension, inequality, causes states who are unequal or are behind to rise up, because they know in a free economy that if you're not the winner, you're the loser, and it sucks to be the loser, and they have to rise up and pretty much claim their territory for themselves. Hence the free economy. There's no one to create an economy for you. There's no one to set where you are. There's no socialism involved where everyone is equal. For example, here I just used Singapore. That's a pretty well-known example of a country that started at the bottom and ended up being a very high economy in itself. It was a first world country, and just a couple decades ago it was a third world country that was not doing very well at all. So yeah, I do believe that he does have a point, saying that it is that I do believe that it is true. Economies are unequal. This does create tension, but rather than looking at it a bad way, say that this will create conflict, we can look at it as a good way. This will create innovation. This will create competition, leading to better products, leading to more just companies changing, influencing, having better practices, having more innovation, having more better engineered products, etc. And his fourth point that I would like to touch on is a little bit. I try to understand it as best I could, but from what I gathered, he's just said the countries that are feeling left out. I'm guessing what he meant was countries that aren't at the top would eventually pretty much feel sick of not being at the top and try to gather momentum, gather other states that aren't at the top as well, and try to create conflict with the states that are at the top. Um, he pretty much said that if one state leaves, this will cause a chain reaction, and in order to have a interdependent society or economy, all chains of all links of the chain must be pieced together and functioning together. And at least what I understand is this is a good point. It is valid. It is pretty easy to see that yes, if someone is not getting what they want, there is a pretty likely understanding that there's a chance that that person, that state in this case, would likely rise up, create conflict, and theoretically this would make sense. I can't really see how to dispute this in just terms of theory, but practically, this doesn't really seem like a good idea in a state, at least a functioning state with good intention, without corruption, without any bad means to go the other way other than the logical route, would not do this just because it really makes no sense. I guess a good way to put it in simple terms, it sucks to be at the bottom, but it sucks a lot more to be cut off from the rest of the world. Being at the bottom or being not at the top, let's say in the middle, or just pretty much not at the top of a free, interdependent society or economy is not the best. Of course, everyone wants to be like the U.S. or like Europe or like Singapore, eventually China, where they have a lot of power in terms of economy. But again, it sucks to be at the bottom, but it sucks a lot more to not have anything really being dependent on, or being independent on yourself only. As we know, that is just simple economics that a company or a country can't function well at all if it's just by itself. There needs to be trade, there needs to be specialization, there needs to be interdependence between countries and states. And it is, in theory, it is in the state's best interest to stay out or stick it out as long as possible. If they don't want to be at the bottom, we can do like what Singapore does, like what China does, where they used to be a third world country. They found their niche, they found their specialty, and then they just use that to rise up. And that is only possible through interdependence, through trade. Singapore, they took advantage of their geography. They used that canal to pretty much make their entire country. While China, they used their manpower, their man resources, or their actual resources, just to build up their economy as well. And this would not be possible if they chose to cut themselves out and isolate themselves from the world. Because what would they be doing? China wouldn't be able to make any products for the Western world. They would have no economy. If Singapore tried to not, if they were against trade, they would have no business at all through the Singapore Canal. So again, yes, it does in theory make sense, but again, in theory, if you look the other way, at least in my opinion, it makes more sense that a country would try to, rather than create conflict, try to rise up and try to break away from the interdependence, to try to find their niche, try to specialize, try to find what they can do and take advantage of being in the interdependent economy and try to rise up. But again, I do see where he's coming from, that this can happen. This can go the other way. But that's my reply to Alexander Dower's post that economic liberalism cannot lead to world peace. Thank you.